It was the kind of moment that split Theric world like a lightning bolt. Lars Ulrich, Metallica's steady heartbeat, finally broke his silence. And what he told us wasn't just rumors. It was a truth sharp enough to cut through the myth of Ozzy Osbourne. This wasn't stumbling TV guy in a bathrobe. Lars pulled back the curtain to show the king of heavy metal. A man who ruled his kingdom while leaving behind angry fights and scandals whispered in every backstage area. For years these stories crawled through backstage hallways like snakes in Thedark. But when Lars said them out loud, the legend cracked, showing not an untouchable god, but a man forever at war with his own demons. Dude from thievery beginning, Ozzy seemed to carry a storm inside him. His rise to fame with Black Sabbath in the late 1960s and early 1970s was a battlefield of clashing egos and hot tempers, not just over the music, but over the way he lived. His bandmates got to red from dealing with his spinning chaos. Nights drowned in oceans of alcohol. Mornings covered with the mess, half-dangerous highs. That craziness didn't stay locked within Sabbath's walls. It spilled over into his deals with Therist of the rock world. Lars described Ozzy as a man of extremes, magneticon, incredibly charming one moment, then exploding into angry outbursts without warning the next. Metallicast meetings with him could turn on Acne's edge, swinging from loud laughter and shared glory to an icy, choking resentment in a single breath, as if the air itself had been poisoned by his unpredictable anger. Ozzy's personal life was no less dramatic. If anything, it was a hurricane that never stopped spinning. Love for him was not a gentle song, but a war anthem. His marriage to Sharon Osbourne became one of rock's most famous sagas. Equal parts fierce devotion and total disaster. They were partners in business and partners in battle, locked in a constant push and pull between love and war. Their story was filled with explosive fights that shook the walls. Heartbreaking briefs, followed by dramatic makeups and tabloid-breaking grovellians of affairs, betrayals, and nights lost in chaos. Sharon wasn't the only one caught in Ozzy's personal storms. Friends, fellow musicians, and industry allies often found themselves drawn in, only to be burned by the intensity of his personality. Moments of friendship turn on a dime into icy silencizer verbal warfare. Lars spoke of times when Ozzy's iron grip on control and his steep distrust drove away even his strongest allies. There were friendships that ended in shouted accusations, backstage fights that felt like final showdowns, and rivalries born not from competition but from broken trust. One by one, bridges were set on fire, sometimes in a fit of anger, sometimes in a slow planned burn, until the smoking remains were all that was left of once-loyal bonds. But we've always been interested in pushing We've always been interested in on the tour before the one where, just talking about the Black Album tour, we actually sold the ticket. What lay behind the curtain was not through warmth of friendship, but the burned earth of relationships to damaged over rebuild. Think of the biggest names in rock and metal. The giants, whose names are carved in the very foundation of the genre, at one point or another, many of them found themselves staring straight down the barrel of Ozzy's unpredictable rage. From bitter decades-long disputes with former Black Sabbath buddies like Tanyomi, clashes that sometimes simmered quietly and other times exploded in public to nasty fights with younger bands. He felt were stepping on thesaccord ground he had built. Ozzy was never happy to simply let his fights could be cold-and calculated or blazingly impulsive, shifting from backhanded compliments to cutting insults without warning. Stories of onstage arguments, stinging public jabs, and whispered tales off behind the scenes sabotage flood Theka writers of rock history. Promo Terstrom Burr, last-minute walkouts. Journalists recall interviews where Ozzy is the spotlight to destroy rivals. Fellow musicians speak of opportunities mioslisti, disappearing after crossing him. One of the most famous chapters came during Ozfest when his feud with Bruce Dickinson of Iron Maiden escalated into a full-blown war of egos. Under the-burning stage lights, with thousands watching, the tension was obvious. Verbal shots, crowd manipulation, and a brewing hostility that became the stuff of heavy metal folklore. It wasn't just a disagreement. It was theater, combat, and a masterclass in how personnel grudges can become part of rock's loudest, most dangerous legend. Beyond the music, Ozzy's life unfolded like a battlefield littered with broken pieces of his own making. His battles with addiction were not just famous, They wear relentless wars fought in dark hotel rooms, sterile rehab centers, and on stages where the crowds cheers Mascata's inner collapse. Decades of relapses. The numbing fog of drug abuse and brushes with death became chapters in his legend, as much as the music that made him famous. Every comeback was followed by another fall, each more public than the last. Family life brought its own storms. Picture this. Heated arguments behind mansion doorstep, no amount of wealth could soundproof. Phone calls gone unanswered for months. Children, who once stood proudly at his side, now keeping their distance. Periods of being cut off from his kids were splashed across tabloids, turning private wounds into public spectacle. The glare of constant media attention only deepened the cracks. Every stumble, every slurred word, every tear caught on camera fed into a cycle could not escape. Lars's shocking revelations forced fans to see the roaring, unstoppable Forcian stage and the man alone in a man both blessed and cursed be his fame. Ozzy was driven by a hunger to dominate, to remain the unshakable prince of darkness. Yet he was equally haunted by self-destructive impulses that sabotaged friendships and left him standing amid whirlwinds of relationships he once believed would wear unbreakable. Picture this. Ozzy Osbourne, at the very top of his empire, a living monumento heavy metal fury, stadiums roared like an endless thunderstorm. Waves often crashing toward the stage in a frenzy, their chants shaking the earth. His name wasn't just known, it was carved deep into the unbreakable granite of rock history, seemingly eternal. From the outside, it looked invincible. But behind that towering image was a bill that few could afford to pay. The price was not just steep, it was punishing. Behind the velvet curtain, the scene was far from glorious. Stacks of lawyer letters loomed like snowdrifts in Aberdeen winter, each envelope an illegal ambush. Disputes over music rights turned into wars fought with signatures and court papers instead of riffs and drum beats. These battles didn't just eat away at his fortune, they ate at his spirit, draining the fire that had once driven him to conquer the world. His body bore a record of self-inflicted damage. Bones shattered in reckless accidents, joints screaming from years of abuse, hands shaking from the chemical toll of a lifetime spent chasing numbness. On some days, his legendary voice could barely claw its way up the steep hills of his own songs, leaving him to wonder if the next performance would be his last. Tours, once his lifeblood, were no longer canceled for strategy or rest. But because his body simply refused to cool. The stage lights dimmed, replaced by the suffocating quiet of forced retreat. And while he hid from the roar of the crowd, the industry filled the silence with whispers of his decline. Rumors spreading like gasoline over dry ground. Each absence treated as a death nail. Each consolidate a confirmation of the inevitable. The crown he had fought tooth and nail to keep seemed to grow, heavier with every passing year, digging deeper into his skull. And the more desperately he held onto it, the more his personal kingdom crumbled beneath his feet. Once loyal friends drifted into the mist. Orwars turned against him, trust burned to ash in the heat of betrayals and mutual suspicion. Family wounds too raw to heal in private spilled into tabloids where every headline beckoned a public trial. His life was Axe's board where every piece was a potential enemy. Every move another risk-off disaster. The shimmering illusion, oft indestructible rock god, began to break apart. What emerged from the cracks was not the immortal prince of darkness world thought it knew, but a Mannix house at battle-scarred, and perhaps beginning to suspect that the fight to remain on top might cost him everything. The glory, the riches, the adoration, they had come with a bill written in pain, loneliness, and blood. And as Feuds of his empire pressed down harder than ever, Ozzy was left standing in the shadow of his own legend, wondering if the price had finally become too high to pay. Despite every scandal, every whispered rumor, every public collapse, Ozzy Osbourne stands unshaken in rock history, a jagged crown upon the head of heavy metal's founding king. He did just ride the rising storm of heavy metal, he created it, bending its hunter to his will, crafting a sound and spectacle so fierce it became an anthem of rebellion itself. Yet Lars' story doesn't just shine a spotlight on that legacy. It drags us into the dim hallways that run Benefit, where the air is thick with cigarette smoke, spilled liquor, and the muffled growl of unspoken regrets. Picture this. A man lit by blinding stage lights, sweat dripping like molten silver, a sea of faces screaming his name until the very earth seems toe-shake. He raises his arms like a victorious general returning from battle. But every step is chained by chains you cannot see. Chains chains of enemies made in careless moments. Chains of voices that hound him in the stillness after Theror fades. On stage, he was Thepriot, off-stage prey to demons that never tired. His legend is sewn together with golden thread and frayed rope alike, equal parts triumph and tragedy. There are the euphoric highs, platinum records, arenas conquered. A name carved deep into the stone of music history. Trust broken beyond repair. Explosions of rage in public set could not be silenced. Aliens crumbling into bitter dust. For every time he was lifted on the shoulders, often there was a night alone in some anomalous hotel room, staring into Thebes of his own reflection, wondering if the magic had already begun to rot. The music, the scandals, the rivalries, they are welded together like fused so completely that to pull one apart would destroy the whole. Every triumphant scream from the stage woe-stalked by a shadow just out of sight. The gnawing fear of collapse, the cold hands of old addictions reaching for him. The world knew the Prince of Darkness, a living myth with a voice like a siren call. But Lars forces us to see the man pacing those privatacios, jaw-tight eyes burning with Maries that refuse to fade. Hair-played old betrayals like worn out, each scratch a reminder of Simeon lost or trust shattered. Each eyes of static, a ghost whispering his failures back to him. Lars's revelations didn't just peel away a polite layer of mess. They ripped down the velvet curtain with such violence that the dust chokes you. Behind the grandeur is not some untouchable god, but the bottle-red framework of a man who has bled for every ovation. Fans are left holding twat Ruths in their hands, one gleaming, one cracked, beyond repair. Ozzy Osbourne, immortal in music, fragile in spirit, a magnet for devotion and destruction. Forever caught in that razor-thin place where immortality flirts with